The year is 2011. It is a cold May night in Melbourne, Australia. Dan Saunders is standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of a five-star hotel penthouse, staring down at the city streets. He is watching the distant flash of police sirens, waiting for them to pull up to the lobby. His hands are trembling. He hasn't slept properly in weeks. Just 4 months ago, Dan was a regular guy, a bartender in a small, quiet country town, pouring beers and living paycheck to paycheck. Then, by a stroke of pure accidental luck, he found an ATM with a button. Not a regular button, but a glitch, a backdoor in the global financial system. An infinite money button. Every single night, at exactly 1 in the morning, the banking network would briefly disconnect for maintenance. In that blind spot, the system could be tricked. Dan exploited this glitch to conjure $1.6 million out of thin air. He spent it on private jets, VIP suites, and champagne that cost more than a luxury car. But tonight, the illusion is collapsing. The phantom money has run out, the sirens are getting louder, and someone is finally at the door. How did an ordinary bartender accidentally hack the banking system to unlock infinite cash? And how long can a man outrun reality before the ultimate bill comes due? To understand the unraveling of Dan Saunders, we have to rewind exactly 4 months, to a humid February night in 2011. Wangaratta, Australia is a quiet, unassuming town, far removed from the glaring neon lights and fast-paced wealth of the big city. Dan Saunders, a 29-year-old bartender, is locking up the pub after a long, exhausting shift. He is practically invisible to the world, just another guy wiping down counters and hoping the patrons leave a decent tip. He is low on cash, a little thirsty, and wandering down the empty street hoping to find an ATM so he can pull out a few dollars for a cold beer at a late-night venue. The time is exactly 1:30 in the morning when he slides his debit card into the machine. He is just hoping to withdraw a meager $20. Instead, the ATM screen flashes a strange, unexpected error message. Balance unavailable at this time. The screen flickers. For a split second, Dan thinks he sees his actual checking account balance flash on the screen, $3.42. Then, it vanishes. Dan sighs. This is a bad night. He knows he doesn't have any money in his savings, just a couple of stray coins. But this specific message isn't the standard insufficient funds rejection. It is something else entirely. Driven by the mild buzz of his post-shift exhaustion, he decides to try something foolish. He navigates through the ATM's menu and attempts to transfer $200 from his credit card account, which he knows is completely maxed out, into his savings account. He thinks that maybe, just maybe if the transfer goes through, he can withdraw the cash. He hits confirm. The machine whirs, grinds its mechanical gears for a moment, and then unceremoniously spits his card back out with a new message. Transaction canceled. No money, no receipt, nothing. It is past midnight, the machine is clearly malfunctioning, and most people would have just sighed, turned around, and walked home. Dan almost does exactly that, but something about that specific sequence of errors lingers in his mind. He has absolutely nothing to lose. He slides his card back into the glowing slot. This time, he selects to withdraw $200 directly from the savings account that he knows is empty. A soft, mechanical clicking sound echoes from deep within the machine. And then, to his absolute shock, the metal shutter opens. The ATM dispenses exactly $200 in crisp, real cash. Dan checks the bills twice. He holds them up to the dim streetlights. They are real. The serial numbers are different. This is not a dream. He glances nervously over his shoulder, half expecting a security camera to zoom in on his face or a guard to step out of the shadows. But there is nothing. Just the gentle hum of the ATM and the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. Did the bank just give him an unapproved overdraft? Or is this specific ATM completely blind to his actual balance? Stuffing the cash deep into his pockets, Dan walks to the nearest open bar. His mind is racing. He buys a round of drinks for some friends, acting as casually as possible, pretending nothing extraordinary just happened. But inside, his brain is on fire. Is this a fluke? A once-in-a-lifetime computer error? Would it work again? On his walk home, the quiet town feels different. The ATM glows in the darkness like a beacon. Dan takes a deep breath, hands shaking, and inserts his card for a third time that night. He tries another transfer between his accounts, $500 this time. He follows the exact same steps. The machine dispenses the cash without a single warning. Emboldened, he immediately goes for another $600. More cash slides into his hands. Dan literally laughs out loud in the middle of the deserted street. It feels as if he has discovered a cheat code for reality itself: infinite cash. By the time he finally unlocks his front door, his wallet is bulging with hundreds, and his mind is completely overwhelmed with possibilities. Tomorrow, he thinks, the bank will know. Tomorrow, the alarms will sound. Tomorrow, this brief, magical glitch will end. But tonight, he lays $1,300 in cash on his bed and laughs. What if tomorrow never comes? The morning light hits Dan like a physical blow. He wakes up with a terrible realization. The previous night must have been an illusion, a drunken hallucination. Surely, he didn't actually steal cash from a broken machine. But there, sitting on his nightstand, is a massive stack of bills that absolutely was not there yesterday. His heart skips a beat. It was real. He grabs his cell phone and calls the bank's automated hotline to check his balance, fully expecting the police to trace the call. The robotic voice reads out his savings account total, negative $2,000. Dan exhales slowly. So, the money had to come from somewhere. He is technically deep in the red, but the bank hasn't frozen his account. Not yet. Because he is sharp, Dan figures out exactly what is happening. He has discovered a microscopic blind spot in the global financial network. In the early hours of the morning, between 1 and 3 a.m., the ATMs disconnect from the bank's main server to undergo routine daily maintenance. During this brief offline window, the ATMs cannot verify a user's actual balance. They essentially operate on an honor system, trusting whatever transfer command the user inputs and recording it to be processed the next day when the system comes back online. Dan devises a terrifyingly simple plan. If the ATM gives him cash while it is offline, he can cover the negative balance the next night by making an even larger fake transfer before the system realizes what happened. Every single night, he will cover yesterday's negative balance with a massive phantom transfer during that midnight window. In theory, he can roll this debt forward indefinitely. He is creating money that vanishes and reappears like a yo-yo. It sounds completely insane, but there is only one way to know for sure. That night, Dan returns to the same ATM under the cover of darkness. He waits for the exact minute the clock strikes 1 a.m. This time, he is bolder. He transfers $4,000 from his credit card to his savings, a totally bogus move considering his credit limit isn't anywhere near that high. The ATM, completely oblivious to reality, accepts the command. He then withdraws $2,000 in cash, which is more than enough to clear yesterday's deficit. If his math is correct, by morning his account will show a positive balance when the phantom transfer temporarily clears, before reversing. It is a terrifying tightrope walk over a digital abyss, and it works flawlessly. The next day, there is no bank panic, just a new, slightly larger negative balance waiting to be covered. So Dan pushes the anvil further down the road. Transfer, withdraw, cover. Transfer, withdraw, cover. He cooks the books entirely in his favor. $8,000, $16,000. Within weeks, he is handling the cash flow of a hedge fund manager. On day 12, the ATM freezes mid-transaction. For 30 agonizing seconds, Dan's card is trapped inside the machine. He forgets how to breathe. He is convinced this is it. The gig is up. Then, with a soft click, the machine spits his card out and dispenses the cash. Business as usual. Within a month, the numbers stop looking like real money. Walking into a bank branch to casually check his balance, Dan nearly collapses when the teller cheerfully reads the number on the screen. $1 million. On paper, Dan Saunders is a millionaire. He stares blankly at the 7 figures flickering on the monitor. He has essentially printed his own personal wealth tree out of pure digital thin air. The adrenaline is incredibly intoxicating. He feels like a caveman who has just discovered fire. This secret, this exploit belongs entirely to him. If you found a machine that dispensed infinite money, what would you do? Would you pay off your bills and return to your quiet normal life? Or would you push the absolute limits of possibility? Dan already knows his answer, and so begins the wildest, most surreal ride of Dan Saunders' life. Over the next 5 months, he burns through money like it is going out of style. He spends roughly $1.6 million in total. Each day brings a new, jaw-dropping splurge. He charters a private jet to fly his friends to Bali for a weekend of luxury villas and beachside cocktails. When the pilot casually asks how a small-town bartender can afford a private aircraft, Dan's answer is practiced and smooth. Crypto. The pilot nods respectfully. Everyone believes in the magic of crypto. Dan books entire floors of 5-star hotels in Melbourne, tossing $100 tips to the staff like confetti. At a downtown nightclub, he plunks down his black card and treats everyone in the VIP section to top-shelf vintage champagne, a $50,000 night that the club will never forget. He throws massive parties where the bar tab alone is enough to buy a suburban house. But it isn't all pure self-indulgence. Dan quickly discovers that giving money away provides a psychological high far greater than spending it on himself. When a friend mentions he is struggling to pay his university tuition, Dan quietly wires the full amount to the school to settle the debt. He pays off another buddy's crushing student loans without blinking an eye. At one point, he even covers the debt of a casual acquaintance, simply because he can. If you have imagination and money, you can make people's wildest dreams come true, he muses, grinning at the stunned, tearful gratitude of the people around him. For a brief, shining moment, he becomes a local legend. The humble bartender turned secret millionaire philanthropist. People who never knew his name suddenly remember that they went to primary school together. Strangers cozy up to him, sensing the powerful aura of limitless cash. He notices men treating him with a new, fearful deference. Women who never gave him a second glance are suddenly hanging on his every word. Having money, or rather, looking like you have infinite money, changes the very fabric of how the world treats you. Dan revels in it. He is living a life stolen from a Hollywood movie montage. Private jets, penthouse suites, tailored suits, and VIP treatment everywhere he breathes. And all of it is powered by a late-night glitch that absolutely no one else knows about. Each night, regardless of where he is in the world, he still has to perform his terrifying little midnight ritual. He logs onto his computer or sneaks down to a local ATM to shuffle hundreds of thousands of dollars between phantom accounts to keep the illusion from collapsing. It is a small price to pay for the freedom to be anyone he wants to be in the daylight. He lies to his family about where the cash is coming from, concocting elaborate stories about being an investment banker, an early tech investor, or a real estate prodigy. Deep down, he knows he is living on borrowed time and stolen digital currency. But the thrill is far too great to stop. Not yet. The turning point happens on a Tuesday night in a swanky Melbourne bar. Dan is holding court, buying drinks for the entire room. His closest friend, Jake, suddenly grabs Dan's wrist hard as he reaches for his wallet. "I know what you're doing," Jake whispers, his voice trembling with anger and fear. The music completely stops in Dan's head. The transfers. The midnight ATM runs. The phantom money. "I saw you at the machine last week," Jake says, leaning closer. "You're going to prison, mate. And I can't sit here and watch it happen." He drops Dan's wrist, turns around, and walks out of the bar. Dan is left standing in the neon light, completely paralyzed. To mask the terror, he immediately orders another bottle, the most expensive one they have. But the crack in the facade has formed. Dan can no longer push aside the nagging, hollow pit in his stomach. He had become addicted to the rush of being the high roller, the hero, the man of the hour. Yet, late at night when the parties finally die down and he is left alone in his massive empty hotel suites, a silent dread creeps into the back of his mind. It sounds like the distant, inevitable rumble of an approaching storm. As the spring of 2011 wears on, that shadow grows into a suffocating paranoia. He knows, logically, that a mathematical impossibility cannot go on forever. Every joyride eventually runs out of road. His nerves are completely shot. The man who once laughed in the street at his free money now jumps at every shadow. Night after night, he bolts awake, drenched in sweat, from the exact same nightmare. Red and blue police lights flashing through his hotel window. Heavily armed authorities finally kicking down the door to drag him away in handcuffs. He develops a constant, uncontrollable tremor in his hands. Severe anxiety attacks hit him at random. His heart racing so fast he thinks he is having a cardiac arrest. Dan develops a dark morning ritual. The moment he opens his eyes, he Googles his own name alongside the words arrest, fraud, and manhunt. Nothing shows up, but the word yet is doing an awful lot of heavy lifting. When his cell phone rings, he snatches it up immediately, half hoping it is a detective who will finally end this exhausting charade. In his quietest moments, staring into the bathroom mirror, he asks himself what he has become. After a lifetime of playing by the rules, he has broken every single one of them, and his conscience simply won't let him rest. The irony of the situation is absolutely maddening. The bank still hasn't caught on, the algorithm is completely blind to the loop. Their internal fraud department does call him occasionally, but only to confirm his safety regarding his latest outrageous expenditures. "Did you recently spend $8,000 at a luxury hotel?" the representative inquires politely. "Yes, that was me," Dan sighs into the phone, rubbing his temples. "All right, no worries, sir. Just checking to protect your account. Thank you for your business," the rep chirps before hanging up. It is utterly absurd, almost comical. He is systematically robbing a financial institution of millions of dollars, and the only thing the bank has to say is thank you for your business. But Dan can't laugh anymore. He is mentally exhausted, deeply paranoid, and heavily burdened by shame. In June of 2011, he finally hits the brakes. He can't run anymore. One night, Dan deliberately skips the midnight transfer routine. He lets the clock strike 3 a.m., allowing the system to finally reconcile the math and reveal the ugly truth. Instantly, his account balance plummets from $1 million into the negative millions. The entire fantasy is laid bare on the digital ledger. The next morning, he picks up the phone and calls his bank manager. His voice is shaking. He tries to confess everything. He offers to return whatever cash he has left. The bank manager cuts him off mid-sentence. "Sir, your account has been flagged. It is a police matter now. We cannot discuss this with you." Dan's heart drops into his stomach. He hangs up the phone, sits on the edge of his bed, and waits for the sirens. He waits for 1 hour, then 2 hours, then a whole agonizing day. But no one comes. The silence that follows is deafening. The silence stretches for days, which turn into weeks, which turn into months. Dan realizes something far worse than an immediate arrest. They are not coming because they are building a massive, airtight federal case. Every single transaction, every ATM withdrawal, every private jet, every party, it is all permanently documented in the bank's mainframe. The real question is no longer if they will arrest him, it is how many decades in prison he will get. 2 full years pass, and still, there is no knock at the door. Dan lives in absolute purgatory. The bank has quietly swallowed the $1.6 million phantom loss, hiding it in their ledgers, unwilling to admit to the public that their security system was defeated by a bartender hitting a few buttons at midnight. The guilt eats Dan alive. He cannot move on with his life, cannot get a real job, cannot sleep. Finally, unable to take the agonizing uncertainty any longer, he decides to force a resolution. In 2013, Dan contacts a major national newspaper and spills absolutely everything. He hands them the bank statements, the ATM receipts, the flight logs. His wild story spreads like wildfire across the country. The bartender who exploited a midnight ATM glitch to live like a king. He even appears on national television to explain step by step exactly how he executed the hack, effectively daring the authorities to arrest him. This time, the government has no choice but to respond. The police formally charge Dan with over 100 counts of fraud and theft. At long last, he finds himself sitting in a courtroom, facing the legal consequences of his 5-month spree. But the case proves so incredibly unusual that even the highest legal minds struggle to comprehend it. During the trial, the prosecutor struggles to explain the actual crime to the jury. He stole money that technically didn't exist, the prosecutor stammers. Even the presiding judge has to stop the trial twice to ask for clarification on how the offline server window actually functioned. Dan sits at the defense table and almost laughs. The legal system understands the glitch about as well as the bank did. Dan pleads guilty to all charges. He is deeply remorseful, and above all, intensely relieved to finally atone for what he has done. The judge, taking into account his full confession and the sheer incompetence of the bank's security, hands down a surprisingly lenient sentence: 1 year in a federal prison, followed by 18 months of strict community corrections. Dan serves his time quietly. When his sentence is finally over, he steps out of the prison gates and slips right back into ordinary life. On his very first day back at work, wiping down the counters of a local bar, a regular customer squints at him, recognizing his face from the news broadcasts. "Hey," the customer says, pointing a finger, "you're that ATM guy, aren't you?" Dan nods slowly, bracing himself for the inevitable judgment and insults. The man smiles, reaches into his wallet and slides a crisp $20 bill across the bar. "Well, here is the best tip you'll ever get, because it's from money I actually earned." They both laugh. For Dan, it feels like absolute absolution. The heavy weight of the last 3 years finally lifts from his shoulders. There are no more luxury suites, there is no more easy infinite wealth. There is just a clean apron, a quiet bar, and $20 an hour. Dan Saunders is exactly back where he started, but he is not the same man. The fever dream of infinite free money taught him a brutal, unforgettable truth about human nature and himself. He had nearly lost sight of his own soul in the pursuit of an illusion. Now, having paid the ultimate price in paranoia, fear, and time, he is determined to never let the temptation of a shortcut consume his life ever again.